Good evening, councillors. Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones are turned off or switched to silent. Thank you. Given the recent changes to the COVID-19 restrictions, councillors are able to be present for the meeting this evening. This meeting is being live streamed on the council website to enable the community to view the proceedings. Should technical problems be encountered during the meeting will be adjourned until the problem is rectified, or if needed, the meeting will be postponed. My name is Councillor Jim Park and I chair this committee. I'll start by introducing my fellow councillors and officers. Seated at the horseshoe table to my left, the Mayor, Councillor Gary Thompson, Councillor Susan Bigger, Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, Councillor Wes Galt, Councillor Di Gillies, Councillor Jane Addis and Councillor Victor Franco. Councillor Nick Stavro isn't able to be personally in attendance in the chamber this evening. However, he's joining us online and the Local Government Act enables him to do so. We can see Councillor Stavro on the screen behind the Mayor. The officers in attendance tonight, Philip Storer, the Chief Executive Officer, who's seated behind Councillor Watson, and Sharan Wickramasinghe, who's the Director of Urban Living. He's seated behind Councillor Addis, and next to him is Daniel Freer, who's the Director of Places and Spaces. These titles keep changing, so just as I remember them, they've changed. We've got seated to my left, David Thompson, the Manager of Governance and Legal, and to his left, Elizabeth Manu, who's the Senior Governance Officer, and seated to my right, we've got Simon Mitchell, who's the Manager of Strategic and Statutory Planning, and other officers in attendance will be introduced as they present reports. Essentially, the purpose of the Urban Planning Special Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. Councillors are familiar with the reports, which include a summary of the objections received. For those in the gallery presenting this evening, when we come to the agenda item, it will be introduced by an officer. I will then call you by one to come forward and address Council, and that'll be to the lectern there, which is behind Councillor Franco. If you are making a submission, please present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please don't repeat what earlier speakers have said and keep your submissions focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you're opposed to the planning application, please inform the committee why you're opposed and suggest an alternative approach which would satisfy your concern. Please focus on your concerns rather than matters of history or detail in the officer's report. Please note that there's a strict time limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, including councillors, and whilst as chairperson I reserve the right to vary that time, I seldom do. I will ask speakers to come forward to the lectern in due course. Those speaking against will speak first, followed by those in favour. At the 2.5 minute mark, you'll hear this sound. That will indicate that you've got 30 seconds remaining, and at the conclusion of the time, you'll hear that, which indicates that your time has elapsed. Turning now to the agenda, apologies. Mr Thompson, do we have any apologies this evening?
Through you, Mr Chair, there are no apologies for the meeting this evening.
Thank you. Item 1, adoption and confirmation of the minutes of the UPDC meeting held on 21 September 2020. Councillor Thompson.
Happy to move the minutes.
And Councillor Watson.
Happy to second.
Is there any opposition to that? Then I put that motion. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Item 2, declaration of conflict of interest of any councillor or council officer. Are there any such declarations? No? That takes us then to item 3.1, 15 Hartington Street, Kew. Thank you.
Through you, Mr Chair, I present UPDC item number 3.1 for the amendment of planning permit PP 00932 for the land at 15 Hartington Street in Kew. The subject site is located in a general residential zone Schedule 3 and is not affected by any overlays. The proposal seeks to amend plans previously endorsed by Council on the 29th of November 2019. The proposal maintains the scope of the previously approved development, being 5 townhouses over 3 storeys. The number of dwellings and the number of car parking spaces remains unchanged from the previously approved planning permit. The proposed changes are summarised as alterations to the basement, including an increase to the basement along the western boundaries and stairwells to dwellings 1 and 5. Minor alterations to the building footprint at the ground and first floor levels, which include increases and reductions in the boundary setbacks. Alterations to the third floor footprint, which result in decreased setbacks to the northern and southern boundaries by approximately 0.5 metres. It also proposes to increase the setback to the street of the third floor level by approximately half a metre and remove dwelling 2's balcony facing towards the street. The construction of a 1.5 metre to 1.9 metre high brick front fence to dwelling 1, setback 2 metres from the site's front boundary. Alterations to the building materials, which include removal of the grey face brickwork, render and seam steel cladding to be red brickwork with metal cladding and grid forge panel material over the front facade. Additional paving proposed along the side boundaries, and a minor increase in the overall building height of 200 millimetres. As a planning permit has already been granted, the matters for consideration today only relate to the proposed amendments. The merits of the original application cannot be revisited. The application was advertised for 4 weeks and a total of 13 objections were received. The objections predominantly relate to neighbourhood character and amenity. The main issues associated with the application include: does the proposed amendment to the planning permit appropriately consider the existing and preferred neighbourhood character of the area? And does the proposed amendment to the planning permit result in unreasonable amenity impacts? In relation to neighbourhood character, the proposal achieves full Res Code compliance and is generally compliant with Council's residential design policy. The proposed amendment is supported by Council's urban designer, subject to recommended conditions, which include removal of the grid forge mesh across the front facade. This has been recommended as a permit condition. The proposal has a high compliance with the Council's neighbourhood character policy and neighbourhood character precinct statement. Building materials in the area are varied, and the proposed brick is considered to be acceptable. The overall contemporary design aesthetic is not differing significantly from what has been previously approved. The proposed amendments are generally supported by Council's arborist, subject to permit conditions relating to additional deep soil area. Recommended permit conditions have been included to reduce the extent of paving along the northern and western setbacks for additional deep soil area to allow for the maturity of canopy trees. The proposed fence is considered to be acceptable given it follows the slope of the land. It is set back 2 metres from the site's front boundary and accommodates planting along the street's frontage. The area has examples of many front fence styles, including higher front fences, and the proposal is considered to be acceptable in this streetscape. In relation to amenity, the proposed alteration achieves full res code compliance. The proposed setbacks exceed the requirements specified by Standard B17, side and rear setbacks, and Standard B19, daylight to existing windows. The proposal does not cast any additional shadow to secluded private open space areas and is compliant with Clause B21, overshadowing to secluded private open space. Overlooking has been appropriately managed to comply with Standard B22, with obscure glass screening to habitable room windows and balcony balustrades, which is consistent with the screening measures used in the previously endorsed plans. It is considered the proposed amendment will not unreasonably impact on the amenity of nearby dwellings, and the previous planning permit conditions which have been addressed through the proposed plans or are no longer relevant are proposed to be deleted. It is recommended that Council issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit subject to the conditions in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We have 3 speakers on this item, 2 against and 1 in favour. So we'll start with Mr. Graham Farmer. Mr. Farmer, would you just come forward, thanks? And Mr. Farmer, as I mentioned earlier, you'll have 3 minutes. What I'd like you to do is to start your presentation with your name and address, please.
Sure, it's Graham Farmer, 5/11 Hartington Street, Kew.
Thank you. You can start.
Okay.
Yes.
In the document before us, there is a word which is crucial. The word is amenity. I would like to emphasise how these amendments will erode the most precious amenity available to any of us, access to sun. If these amendments are approved, the second floor of the development will move towards my boundary by 900 millimetres, but more worryingly, the third story will loom closer by 1200 millimetres. That's a lot, 10 metres high. To make matters worse, the height has been raised by 200 millimetres. In the document, the council officer assures us that these alterations achieve res code compliance, which governs enshadowing. There we have it, a cold, hard town planning fact. But here I would like to describe the adverse impact it will have on my life. At the equinox, which the shadow plan relates to, I will be deprived of sunlight, but it will become much worse in the months either side of the winter solstice, when I will be considerably worse off than under the plan council has already approved. A taller, wider structure will badly enshadow my north-facing windows, my bedroom and lounge, for the whole of May, June and July. So I make a respectful plea to you, councillors, tonight, mammal to mammal. This amendment will deprive me of sun, so please don't endorse it. A brave decision such as this will support the core value that council, to its great credit, defends on behalf of all ratepayers, namely amenity. I feel exasperated that we've been called out tonight, and so must council. Council has gone to a lot of trouble approving the original development of a large, bulky building with a flat roof that dominates adjoining dwellings, features specifically discouraged in the precinct guidelines. And since it is the only 3-storey structure in Hartington Street, it must have come close to breaching council's stipulation that, quote, new developments must respect the dominant scale of buildings in the street. And how have the developers repaid council's flexibility? By saying, give me more. So why are they increasing height and floor area, thereby sacrificing my setback? The inescapable answer is to make more money. Sadly, my winter sun is being sacrificed for profit. That doesn't make me feel very good. So, in conclusion, there is something very wrong here. Getting approval of Plan A and then asking for Plan B looks suspiciously like a process of softening up and then slipping in something else, hoping nobody will notice. It is my submission tonight that the developers should not be rewarded for this greedy overreach.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Would you just wait there for a moment? I just want to check whether any of the councillors have any questions. And yes, Councillor Stavrou has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question possibly to the officers. Can you allay Mr. Farmer's fears that that the sunlight that he points to will be not too adversely affected by the new proposal?
We'll take that for the officers to respond to once we come back to that. So we'll just hold that question for the minute. Do you have any of Mr. Farmer?
Mr. Farmer, do you have an assessment of how much sunlight do you think you'll be deprived of?
Well, it's very complex. I mean, I trust what the officer has said, but for example, there's nomenclature which relates to private areas, and where I sunbathe and take my ease and my dotage is a driveway. So I wonder, I mean, it's a question that I was going to ask if I had more than 3 minutes. That seems to be enshadowed. And is that permissible under the Act? Because it's a driveway, but it's the only place on my small property that I can get sun, and I will lose that sun when it's enshadowed by the new amendments.
Yeah. So, Mr. Farmer, I'll have the officers respond to that after the conclusion of all the speakers. So, yeah. I think that probably concludes questions. So thank you for your presentation, and we'll move now to Ms. Glenys Pianta. Could you come forward, thanks? And again, if you wouldn't mind starting with your name and address, thanks, and then just commence your presentation.
Yes. My name is Glenys Pianta, and I'm from Unit 3, 6 Huntington Street, but I'm also have 6 other residents. Do you want their names as well?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Look, I'll start. My first concern is that the alterations to adding to the extra space for this building, this development, will set a precedent, because at 19 Huntington Street there is another home that is being demolished, and there are plans for another set of 5 3-storey dwellings there as well. I live right opposite number 15 Huntington Street, and I will be looking at a huge, bulky building with a beautiful Victorian home in the middle, and then in a few years' time there's going to be another huge, bulky building there. So I would like to know that the plans to increase the area of the 3rd stories in this possibly doesn't go ahead, please. That's concern number 1. Concern number 2 is the actual facade of the building. The proposed red stacked bond brick and black metal facade with the masses of grey paving is not, in my eyes, appropriate to the character of our street. For the developer to say it is common within the area is not accurate. The developer mentions Malvern, which is in Stonnington, and the photos of the buildings within the area, not one of them, really is in Huntington Street. They are in Gladstone Street and in laneways. Where I live, Disraeli Street has its own personality. Gladstone Street, its own personality yet again. Huntington Street, totally different. And down next door is Bright Street, which is just another totally different little street. And what is proposed is a harsh, in-your-face, front, bulky building at Huntington Street with lots of grey paving, and it does not suit the character of Huntington Street. I think I remembered reading in the notes that the developer would work with the local residents to make changes, and I would like him to work with some of us in the residents to actually ask what we would like. They mention 4A Hartington Street. Certainly, it has red brick. It's double-storied. It's a very subdued red, and it's against a grey. It has no fence line. It has over 3 metres of front garden, and it has really lovely paving to the front door and to the garage. But the proposed building opposite me, and I will be looking straight at it, I just call it a bomber facade because it's all red and black and grey. And the proposed trees to be there are starting off at 2 metres.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Pianta. I'll have to draw a line there, but let me just see if there's any questions for you, and it doesn't appear that there are. So thank you. And that takes us then to our final presenter, Mr. Joe Fisher. If you could come forward, please. And again, Mr. Fisher, if you could commence your presentation with your name and address, please.
Yep, my name is Joe Fisher. I'm a town planner from Human Habitats. We're based in Docklands. As far as our office address is 424 of 838 Collins Street in Docklands. Thank you, Mr. Chair, councillors and council staff for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the permit applicant for this matter. As was well described in the officer's report, this is an amendment to an existing approval. The scale of the development, the number of dwellings, the general height and layout have all been approved. This amendment concerns more detailed elements of the proposal only. To this end, when compared to the approved development, the proposal results in a net increase in setbacks when factoring in the gains and losses, and a net increase in landscaping, including additional canopy trees. When compared to the approved development, the proposed amendment and the proposed amendments to the treatment is more consistent with the surrounds than the proposed, and the proposal continues to achieve a high level of Res Code compliance, indeed full compliance with Res Code. This includes all standards regarding setbacks, overlooking and overshadowing. For this reason, I request that the panel uphold the officer's recommendation and grant a notice of decision to amend the permit. I'm now available for questions, though I will forewarn you that I'm filling in for a colleague at this meeting and I've only actually been briefed on it this afternoon, but I will endeavour to do my best with any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of Mr. Fisher? Councillor Stavrid.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Fisher, my question goes to one of the residents' objections. Has your company given consideration to the amenity loss due to sunlight, and have you quantified that?
Yes, certainly. I don't have the figures in front of me, but we've prepared shadow diagrams which show the extent of overshadowing, and then that's calculated based back to the Res Code standard, which sets a maximum amount of overshadowing. If we're going to refer, and jump in if this isn't appropriate, but if we're going to refer back to that objector's concerns about the driveway, regrettably it is linked back to secluded private open space. It's the functional amenity areas as opposed to what are traditionally more service areas such as the driveway. And so those levels of overshadowing, indeed also upon windows to habitable rooms and things like that, have been quantified and do meet the Res Code standard, which is, it's not a mandatory standard, it's a preferred standard, and we do meet that.
Thank you.
There don't appear to be any further questions, so thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you.
So I'll then return to Ms. Caparoso to deal with matters arising.
Mr. Chair. Through Mr. Chair. In relation to the setbacks, the proposal is fully Res Code compliant. In relation to overshadowing, the proposal casts a shadow onto the driveway and carport and the common driveway at 11 Hartington Street. The standard B21, only relates to areas of secluded private open space. A driveway is not considered to be a sensitive area, and therefore the standard doesn't apply to this space. In relation to the concerns about 19 Hartington Street, that's a separate development and can't be considered as part of this amendment. Any changes to that development will be gone through the appropriate processes at that time. In relation to the concerns about the referencing to different areas, there was a site visit conducted today, and brick is a very common feature in the area. Council officer has suggested that the grid forge mesh panelling is to be removed, and that is considered to somewhat ease the bulkiness of the proposal and reduce the harshness of the colours. And in relation to the 2 metre height of trees, Council's arborist has specified that 2 metres is the most appropriate height that a tree can reach longevity when planted. So that's why that is required. Thank you.
Now, there was a question that Councillor Stavrio asked. I'm not sure if you noted that or I can have him ask that again.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll answer that one.
Thank you.
So I think the question was on the lines of whether we can confirm that the overshadowing complies with the appropriate standard, and yes, we can. As mentioned, the standard relates to overshadowing of secluded private open space and not the overshadowing of a driveway. And it relates to the equinox. So in this instance, we've done an assessment. We can confirm that the shadows cast comply with the appropriate res code standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mitchell. Councillor Hollingsworth, do you have your light on?
Yes, thank you, Mr Chair. Ms Gabriso, I just wanted to ask, I've read in the report that it has been supported the Gridgeford mesh panel be replaced. What's it actually been replaced with?
The officer recommendation asks that it's replaced with partial brick and then integrated with the rest of the development. So the brick is integrated at the first floor and then...
And there'll be a variation of colour palettes still at... there'll be...
Yeah. There's a mix of grey and black cladding throughout it at the moment with that grid forge put on top of it. Right. So that would remain, right. And then there would be brick incorporated to the first floor as well.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson. And Councillor Stavro, if you've got any questions, I'll just need you to wave your hand or something for me so I can recognise you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the officers. Number 11, Hartington. I'm just trying to locate where the private open space actually is. Can officers direct me to where that might be?
It appears to be along the southern boundary, so on the opposite side of the development. So abutting the development is the access and the driveway, and then on the opposite side of the development, if you were to go to the survey plan, the secluded private open space.
Page number we can refer to? Page 2 of the...
With your indulgence, Chair, I'll find that and I might come back and ask another question.
Or alternatively, do you want to put it up? Put it up on the screen? Thanks, Councillor Stavro. I see you there, so I'll come to you shortly. We might just see if we can put that on the screen. Just bear with us for a minute.
meets the minimum requirements for a private open space? Roughly?
The proposed shadow diagrams don't cover that area at all.
That's true.
So it only relates, sort of aligns along the southern boundary.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sinfield was next.
Thanks, Chair. Through you to officers. In relation to permeability of the site, I just wanted to confirm that on page 53 of the report, where it discusses permeability in standard B9, that the figures there have been updated in relation to the amendments, or do the figures here relating to the permeable area of 23% of the site relate to the original previously approved plans?
The figures relate to the amendment of 23%, but also noting that with Council's suggested conditions, that will also increase. So it's 23%, which exceeds Res Code, and that will be further increased by the suggested conditions.
Thank you.
Councillor Stavrou was next.
Thank you, Chair. Through you and possibly to the officers and the developer. What I want to ask is, a lot of my residents have commented on the colour scheme to me personally and today here. Can you give a little bit of an account as to how you came about with the colour scheme and how you think it does complement the area in view of what it's replacing and where it's going to?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I might be able to help with this one. So when we're assessing neighbourhood character, we look at a number of things. We look at building form, we look at roof form, and we look at the materials in the area. And in this street, there is a very wide range of materials that are on display. So there's no sort of set character, if you like. There are some 1960s blocks of flats with blonde brick. There are some buildings with red brick. There are some flats with a sort of rendered finish. There's a 1970s block of flats with brown brick. So there's a whole range of different materials that are located in the street, and therefore, we think that the red brick that's been proposed, which is a common residential material, is acceptable in this instance and will fit in reasonably well with the streetscape, given that it's a mixed streetscape. If the street had displayed a particular character of a particular material, then we would be looking closely at what was being proposed and ensuring that it complemented that material. But given that there is such a wide variety in this street, we think that the red brick, as I said, a common domestic material, is acceptable. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does that exhaust your questions, Councillor Stavrou?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Councillor Gulf.
Through you, Chair. Just returning really to Councillor Hollingsworth's question about the removal of the screen and getting a bit more idea, looking at the front elevation of the building, if that screen's removed, the brickwork will rise up between those windows. If we had a rendering of the building with the screen removed, what would that look like? How much of the remaining solid panels would then be red brick?
So as a condition 1 requirement, it will always be to council's satisfaction. So it needs to be integrated into the development and then it would be referred on to urban design and we would work out then how it would work best with the urban designer. So as long as the brick's integrated into the upper floor, then it would be to council's satisfaction.
Through you, Chair, I just carry on with that. I'm struggling with removal of the screen and how that in fact softens the building. If there's a concern about the red brick, I would have thought a dark screen would have caused that upper level to regress more than stand out. And if there is actually in fact some concern about the red brick, I would have thought it had the effect of softening that rather than the other way around. I'm a little confused. I would have thought the proposal here was potentially better.
Thanks, through you, Mr. Chair. When assessing urban design, there is a degree of subjectivity involved, and and our urban designer has viewed this. Her view was that the metal screen, which isn't found in the street at all, would actually project the building forward and make it appear heavier. So her view was that the screen ought to be reduced, ought to be removed, and the brickwork increased. The brickwork is, as I said, a domestic material commonly found in streets across Melbourne, and her view was that that would help the building sit comfortably in the street and integrate the two levels, the ground floor and the first floor, better than having two separate materials. You've got a third material, obviously, at the third floor level. So that was her view. You'd have a base and first floor on the one plane that had similar material, and then a third floor recessed with a different material. That was the basis of her judgment. As I said, there's always a bit of subjectivity in relation to urban design. Get two urban designers in the room and they'll argue over the same building, so that was certainly her view. The officers have, planning officers have adopted that view and included that recommendation. Thank you.
I would be interested to see what the alternative solution was. Once the screen's removed, how the brickwork's treated, because it could have the opposite effect. I think you've left it open to some creativity in the design. It'd be interesting to see what that looked like, but I can leave that as a comment.
All right, then we seem to have exhausted questions, so I'm now in search of a motion. Councillor Stavrou.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I propose to move the motion to accept the officer recommendation and set out as in the agenda papers.
That's what's on the screen, as I understand it. Could I just seek clarification? I see there's a number of strikeouts and so forth. Is that an amended officer's report, or?
No, it's not. That is the recommendation. So we've simply removed those conditions that are no longer relevant because they've already been addressed in this set of plans. They were relevant when the initial permit was approved. So the standard format is that we show all of the conditions that were originally included in the permit, but we strike through those that are no longer necessary because they're either made irrelevant by the changes proposed or the new plans have actually addressed them.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Watson, are you seconding that motion?
Happy to second, yep.
Thank you. And for the assistance of Councillor Stavrou, is that motion opposed at this juncture? It doesn't appear to be opposed at this point, so if you could speak to your motion, please, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, first and foremost, let me say that I understand the sentiment of the residents and the fear of loss of local character. I think local character is crucially important. And I did speak to a number of you, as did the officers. But in having said that, it won't be good governance not to support the officer's recommendation in this particular case. I think partly, and importantly though, that it may lead to false hope down the track for residents. I think what we have in front of us is that there's an existing permit for 5 3-storey dwellings in this land. We only limited to consider the changes proposed in the existing proposal right here now. And now all the setbacks and all the requests basically comply with the residential code standards. We're bound by that. And I think above and beyond, the officers have made recommendations to ensure that the paving is increased, even though the paving would be to be increased, they have made conditions to reduce that amount and have the soil deepening to ensure that we get landscaping appropriate, including an establishment of a canopy. And that's crucial as well. In addition to that, it will help in protecting the neighbouring trees under the tree management plan. So all in all, I think that's the rationale that I'm putting the motion forward.
Thank you, Councillor Stavrou. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I have nothing further to add. I fully support the comments that have been made by the ward councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. There don't appear to be any further speakers, so I'm going to put that motion. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. That then takes us to item 3.2. Mr Mitchell.
Thanks through you, Mr Chair. This report sets out delegated decisions made and VCAT decisions received during August 2020, and the recommendation is that the report be received and noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions at all? No. Councillor Watson?
Happy to move the officer's recommendation.
And Councillor Sinfield?
Seconded.
Is that motion opposed at this juncture? No. Councillor Watson, do you wish to speak?
Just briefly to say thank you to the officers for the work that they've done. It's done with a great deal of professionalism, and thank them for their efforts. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'll put that motion. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Item 3.3, VCAT decisions and decisions under delegation for September 2020.
That's correct, Mr Chair. So the report sets out the delegated planning decisions made by officers and the VCAT decisions received in September, and again the recommendation is to receive and note. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No? Yes, Councillor Watson.
Just a procedural one. These three items seem to be very good candidates for an en bloc motion, and just curious as to why we didn't do it, but we're proceeding as per the agenda, but I just wanted to flag that question.
Yes, I considered that, but it seemed to me that it's a good opportunity for councillors to see and become better acquainted with the process. So little was to be achieved, and we're not pushed for time. So it'd be a good opportunity indeed for some of the newer councillors to move the motions. In fact, so it's that's what makes us a more agile committee when we do have a busy agenda. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I was actually going to support the officer's recommendation, if now's appropriate.
You're moving it, yes?
Yes, happy to
and
move the
I'm
motion.
therefore in search of a seconder. Councillor Thompson. I'll put that motion. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. That takes us then to item 3.4. Mr Mitchell.
Thank you. We had a few of these to catch up on. So this is the VCAT decisions received and decisions made by officers under delegation for October 2020, and again the recommendation is to receive and note. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions? Firstly, no. Then I'm in search of a motion. Councillor Biggar.
How about I put that motion?
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Galt.
I shall second.
Thank you. Then I shall put that motion. Those in favour? And those against? That's carried unanimously. That takes us to item 4, general business. Are there any items of general business? No? Then that takes us to item 5, urgent business. Are there any items of urgent business? No? Then item 6, confidential business. Are there any items of confidential business? No? Then I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Services Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones are turned off or switched to silent. Thank you. Given the recent changes to the COVID-19 restrictions, councillors are able to be present for the meeting this evening. This meeting is being live streamed on Council's website to enable the community to view the proceedings. Should technical problems be encountered during the meeting will be adjourned until the problem is rectified, or if needed, the meeting will be postponed. I'm Councillor Jane Addis, Chair of this committee, and I'll start by introducing my fellow councillors and officers. Seated to the left at the horseshoe table in the council chamber are Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Susan Bigger, Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, and moving round we have Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, Councillor Wes Gold, Councillor Di Gillies, our Mayor Councillor Gary Thompson, and Councillor Victor Franco. Councillor Nick Stavrou is not able to be in attendance in the council chamber this evening. However, he is joining us from his home. The Local Government Act enables him to join us by electronic means of communication. There are a number of officers in attendance tonight. Seated behind Councillor Watson, we have Philip Storer, our Chief Executive Officer. To my right, Sharan Wickramasinghe, Director Urban Living. Daniel Freer, Director Places and Spaces, is seated behind Councillor Gillies. To my left, we have David Thompson, Manager Governance and Legal, and then to his left, Elizabeth Manu, Senior Governance Officer, and there are also other staff members in attendance this evening to assist us. The purpose of the Services Delegated Committee is to deal with issues relating to the provision of human and physical services and Council's infrastructure. For those in the gallery presenting this evening, when we come to the agenda item, it will be introduced by an officer, and I will then call you one by one to come forward and address Council. When making a submission, you are requested to present your viewpoint clearly and concisely on why you agree or disagree with the proposal, and you may suggest an alternative approach which could satisfy your concerns. If you could please not repeat what earlier speakers have said and try to focus on the relevant issues. There is a limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, and that includes councillors. I'll ask speakers to sit at the end of the table and we'll invite those against the item to speak first. Or actually, they're not going to sit at the end of the table. I think they're going to stand at the lectern. Then we'll follow that by those in favour. At the 2.5 minute mark, there'll be a sound which will indicate you have 30 seconds remaining, and if you could conclude your presentation. And then after you've spoken, if you could remain standing while I ask if any councillors have a question for you. So the first item is apologies. Mr Thompson, are there any apologies for this evening?
Through you, Madam Chair, there are no apologies for this evening.
Thank you. Item 1 is adoption and confirmation of the minutes of the Services Delegated Committee meeting held on 14 September 2020. Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt and confirm the minutes? I'm not sure who was first, maybe Councillor Thompson?
Happy to move that motion.
And seconder, Councillor Watson?
Yeah, happy to second the motion.
Thank you. Councillors, is anyone opposed to the motion? No? Councillor Franco, I'm sorry. You're opposed to the motion? Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. Okay. Councillor Thompson, as the mover, would you like to speak to the motion?
I think the minutes speak for themselves, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I presume the second, no, thank you. I'll now put that motion. All those in favour? So that's carried unanimously. And Councillor Stavro, I'm sorry, I didn't look at the screen. Yes, thank you. So I'm assuming there's no one opposed because all hands were up, so I'll declare that motion carried. The next item is declaration of conflict of interest of any councillor or council officer. Councillors, council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared? No, not seeing any hands up. So we'll proceed with the agenda. So the third item is presentation of officer reports, and item 3.1 is Gordon Barnard Reserve dog-friendly play area, and Tina Burakas, Manager Civic Services, will present this item to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you and good evening. This report presents the public submissions received in relation to the proposal to amend Council's order made under the Domestic Animals Act 1994 to designate, can you hear me now? To designate a portion of the Gordon Barnard Reserve in North Balwyn as a fenced dog off-leash play area. Gordon Barnard Reserve has been identified as a preferred location for a fenced dog play area following an extensive site assessment process and community consultation in March 2020, which is detailed in attachment 2 of the report before you, indicating a positive level of support for the establishment of the fenced dog play area at Gordon Barnard Reserve. The area marked in red in figure 1 of the report represents the area identified for the fenced dog play area. The amendment seeks to establish this area alone as a designated off-leash area. The remainder of the reserve will retain its on-leash status. Consultation to amend the order took place between the 21st of August and the 20th of September 2020 and consisted of an online survey which was accessible through Council's Have Your Say page. In addition to this, 1,200 letters were dropped to residents within a 500-metre radius of Gordon Barnard Reserve, and an email with a link to the Have Your Say page was also sent to those who have subscribed to be kept informed about the project. Signage and posters were also placed at the reserve. This consultation was not designed to understand the level of support for the fenced dog play area within Gordon Barnard Reserve, since this was the role of the previous consultation back in March of this year. At the Services Special Committee meeting held on the 10th of August 2020, it was agreed to proceed with the development of a reduced scope fenced dog play area within a portion of Gordon Barnard Reserve. Nonetheless, the community took the opportunity to again comment on the establishment of the fenced dog play area in Gordon Barnard Reserve. A total of 56 responses were received. Overall, the results were positive, with 35 responses, 63%, demonstrating support for the amendment to the order. 19 responses, 34%, were not in favour, and 2 responses, or 3%, were neither clearly in support or in opposition of the proposal. There were a range of concerns raised which form the key points for discussion in the report, including the concern of dogs not remaining under effective control, safety, amenity and environmental impacts to the reserve, suitability of the location given nearby sporting facilities, and definitions and terminology used to describe the area. If the Services Delegated Committee decides to amend Council's order as documented in the report, a community consultation on a design concept will follow. In conclusion, officers recommend the Services Delegated Committee amend Council's order to designate the identified area within Gordon Barnard Reserve as a fenced dog off-leash play area. Happy to take some questions.
Thanks, Ms Burakas. Now, we have one speaker wishing to make a submission on this item. Mr Ian Huntley, I believe you're here, if you'd like to come forward. Thanks, Mr Huntley. If you'd like to state your name and address and interest in the this item. And
Thank
you
you.
have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got 4 photographs to be put up in sequence.
Would you like to give us your name and address,
Okay.
Mr Huntley?
Thank you. My name's Ian Hundley and I live at Stephen Street in North Balwyn, about 200 metres from the subject site actually, and have done for about 30 years. But I wish tonight to supplement my earlier submissions which contest the proposal by providing a few illustrations of other developments that have occurred or potentially are in prospect at Gordon Barnard Reserve. The first photograph shows the swimming pool pavilion as it was when it was first developed. Now that's actually on the site of the current Burundara Sports Centre, so you can get, for those of you that have been there, and I guess it's everyone, you can see how much the built environment has developed in that area over those years, even though actually the population hasn't grown all that much in the area between the early 60s and now, interestingly. The second photograph is of the water garden. Now, the interesting thing about the water garden, which is on the Tovey Street side of Gordon Barnard Reserve, is it's basically a response to increased runoff from residential areas in the area, basically because of reductions in permeable space in residential developments, and also because of effectively climate change and the different sorts of rain events we're getting. In fact, Gordon Barnard Reserve is substantially on an old rubbish tip, and what was a creek is now in a barrel drain. So the eastern oval, which is behind there, is effectively an old rubbish tip. The third photograph is of the leisure centre, which is a very old building, and when the new sports centre was developed a few years ago, I think it was widely anticipated that building would be demolished and also the car parks removed with a view to putting them on the Belmore Road frontage and freeing up all that area for open space. But there seems now to be some uncertainty as to whether that's going to happen, so we're going to have more pressure placed on available space for informal recreational activity and the growing of trees, etc. One of the candidates in the election basically said that she was going to get on with building the community centre in Gordon Barnard Reserve. I mean, this to me is a very troubling sort of prospect if that is to be the case. And finally, this photograph shows a bicycle path which terminates near the sports centre, but the 2008 cycle strategy anticipates it going through 3 other parks as well, which would very heavily compromise not only Gordon Barnard Reserve but also these 3 other parks as well. And interestingly, in relation to the proposed dog park, we'd have that in sort of cheek by jowl with that park, and also with the eastern oval. So all in all, this is a very troubling sort of a development. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Well timed. Councillors, are there any questions for Mr Huntley? Councillor Park. Sorry, I'm not quite tall enough to see the light.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Huntley, I'm just a little bit intrigued about your comment about the Balwyn Leisure Centre, because there is a council decision on the books to demolish it after its existing temporary use. I'm not sure what it was that gives you reason to think that there's some different intention by council.
Yeah, I've got no doubt that it's going to be demolished, Councillor, but my concern is what may take its place. I think the view when the sports centre was open, the Burundara Sports Centre was open, that this would go to open space, not only the area occupied by the leisure centre but also that car parking which is on the Balwyn Road frontage, with a view to consolidating car parking on the southern side of the park. But it's not clear to me that in fact will materialise. So that's my concern.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mr Hundley. Wondering if you might be able to just explain to me a little bit more as to where your concern comes from with the proximity of the fenced dog play area and the biodiversity water treatment area within the park?
Well, as far as the dog park is concerned, it's basically going to be an entirely fenced area. The current area is an open area, treed open area, which is available to all comers. It also provides access through to Belmore Road and beyond. But that is going to be compromised by this fenced off area. So what we're going to be left with, as far as I can see, is on the northern side there of the bike path, you will have the eastern oval, which is a fenced oval, sensibly, and complemented very close on the southern side by the dog park. So the look and feel of that area, as far as an informal park area is concerned, will change quite radically, I'd suggest, for the worse and for no real benefit.
Thanks, Chair.
No follow-up? No. Okay. Councillor Franco.
Mr Huntley, in your submission to Council, you mention the Eastern Oval at Gordon Barnard Reserve as an alternative option, and I wonder whether that is currently an off-leash area. You say that you believe that there is no such requirement. I'd ask you to expand on why you think there isn't any such requirement and why you think it would be suitable as an alternative to the current proposal.
My general view is that an off-lead, what's it called, a proposed dog-friendly play area is unnecessary. But if it was felt that a fenced-off area was necessary or could be provided de facto, then that seemed to me to present as an alternative which would actually have the benefit of maintaining the treed area, which is basically open to all comers and wouldn't basically constrain the use of that area in the way that it would. So that's the reason for me putting that as a potential suggestion. I mean, other ovals in the municipality are in effect used in that sort of way, informally.
You have a follow-up, or you right?
And specifically, why don't you think an off-leash area is required in that location?
Why do I think one's required?
Not required.
Because there are, I've walked dogs in the area for 20 years, and there are plenty of areas which are off-lead over the road. There's an off-lead park that's available for most of the week. It's a bit constrained on weekends, but it's available for most of the week. If you want to go a bit further, you can go into Macleay Park, which is available pretty much all the time. It's not so constrained by sporting use, and I'd say the same in East Kew for Stradbroke Park, and that's certainly the case for Hayes Paddock, where you can walk your dog off-leash at any stage. The Coonung Creek Reserve, a much more substantial park, but a bit further away, is also off-leash and available 24/7. So, our experience has been there are plenty of options around. We walk our dog off-lead, on lead, on footpaths. The options are there pretty much all the time. And in my view, the cost of this particular sort of service in this park is too great for actually what would be lost.
Thank you. Councillor Bigger, you have a question?
Thank you. It is a question. So just to clarify, I guess, Mr. Huntley, is your main concern then about the loss of open space in Gordon Barnard, or is it about the sense that there's a lack of need for this, or both?
Well, given what's available, I think there's no particular requirement for it. But in addition to that, if it was built, it would result in a significant loss of amenity in the loss of the open space available for all comers now. So that's essentially the way I look at it. It's not really necessary. and we'd lose quite a great deal if this were to materialise.
Thank you. I can't see any more lights on, so if I could hand back to Ms Bourakas for any responses. Oh, and Mr Huntley, thank you.
Just a comment really, Mr Huntley, that the report that's been put up today for discussion is to amend the order. The consultation on whether a fenced dog play area is feasible to have in Gordon Barnard Reserve has already occurred. That consultation was in March earlier this year. So that decision, in my view, has already occurred, where as I said, the proposal tonight is really to just change the order to allow that to formally happen.
Thank you. Nothing more to add? Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions for the officers? Councillor Franco, you have a question?
Yes, I'd like to understand the nature of the fencing that's proposed. How high? What's it made of? Permeable, etc.
That's part of the design phase that will occur. Mr Frere might be able to assist us with some early thinking in relation to that. The report identifies that there'll be multiple access points so that there isn't congestion. The report also identifies that the fencing will preclude dogs venturing onto nearby facilities such as the ovals, and also the bike path, which is 5 to 6 metres away, but Mr Frere might be able to assist with some early thinking on that.
Thank you. And through the Chair, I'm just searching the earlier report which is attached to the report tonight in respect to the height of the fences, and my memory from that was that the height was in the order of 1.5 metres. I'm aware that we're soon to commence further consultation with the community in respect to the design. I can confirm that height back to councillors, but if you bear with me for a few moments, I might be able to find it within the report.
Thank you. Councillor Park, your light's on.
Thank you. My question may not be able to be answered by the Director of Urban Living, but there's other directors who might. And it's simply to clarify, given that Mr Huntley raised the issue, could I ask for the appropriate director to clarify the proposed timeline on the demolition of the BLC?
I think that's Mr Frere. Thank you.
It is. Thank you, Madam Chair. The Council resolved on this matter on the 27th of May 2013, which at that point said, and I can just read the resolution now, to agree in principle to the demolition of the BLC building upon completion of the project, conditional to replication of the services currently being delivered from the BLC building at the BSC site, subject to successful consultation with all users of both the BSC and BLC, as well as the wider community. So that set up, I guess, the principle of demolishing the building. The building has been used as a temporary housing for a number of services of late as we've undergone construction, and most recently as part of the Baldwin Community Centre site. I understand all of the tenants from the site are due to vacate the building early in the new year to re-establish programs from the Baldwin Leisure Centre for the new term of next year. So at that point it will be vacant, and that would enable us to commence that consultation with the community and indeed demolish the building. Perhaps, Madam Mayor, if I can just confirm, it was that fence height was 1.5 metres and black chain mesh fence material.
Thank you. Councillor Park, you have a further question?
Just to follow up, if I might, when might one reasonably expect, do you think, to see the wrecking ball level that building? It has been a long time coming, and some of us have been here since that decision was taken back in 2013, and have sort of anxiously awaiting, as no doubt are members of the community. So just from what you said, I'm just curious when you think that might actually occur.
Madam Chair, I would expect that to be completed by the end of this current financial year.
Thank you. Councillor Gold, you have a question.
Through you, Madam Chair. Look, this might have all come out before, but being a newbie, I'd be very interested to know roughly what the cost breakdown on such a facility would be, the fencing and anything else that's associated with it.
Through you, Chair, there's a sum of $470,000 in the current budget, current financial year budget for this project.
I think Mr. Freer has something to add.
If through Madam Chair, if I can add some further clarification, the Gordon Barnard Reserve project is in the order of $350,000. The balance of the funds is to improve dog off-leash facilities at other parks. There are a number of, I think there are about 5 other parks around the city that will also see some improvements being made to it. We are an applicant at the moment to a grant to the state government. We haven't found whether we have received that grant or not for this site as well, and that would, I think it's in the order of $250,000, and that would offset our costs once again.
Thank you. Have another question?
Through you again, Madam Chair. Just be interested to know what the breakdown is. That all fencing? That's a lot of fencing, I would have thought.
Through Madam Chair, I don't have a breakdown of all of the project components, but it's certainly not all fencing. I think from memory, the fencing on that project would be in the order of about $60,000. There are a number of other elements to the project.
That satisfy you? Maybe. Thank you. Councillor Bigger, you have a question for officers?
I do, through you, Chair. I don't know whether this is a question that I can ask today, but because obviously this is a little bit tricky about what we're discussing today versus what was discussed in the past. However, it would be very helpful for me to understand, in terms of the community consultation that went on in March of this year, are you able to at least give any indication about sort of the numbers of people that we consulted with, or the broad feedback about that? And can I just tack my last little bit onto that question and ask whether or not at the time when we consulted with the community, whether we had a figure in mind, whether we were able to talk to the community about how much, $350,000, $370,000. Were we able to discuss that at the time?
So in the consultation that happened earlier in the year, 174, we received 174 responses. 119 were in support of the general principle to have a fenced dog play area somewhere in Boroondara, and 83 of which, 48% of the 174, were in support of the fenced dog play area within Boroondara specifically and within Gordon Barnard Reserve.
You have a follow-up?
And as part of that consultation, there was a letter dropped to dwellings within 500 metres of the site, which essentially equated to 1,200 letters being dropped off, in addition to the other forms of consultation, such as marquees on site so that the community could attend and ask questions, as well as using our website to publicise the consultation process.
Thank you. Councillor Bigger does have another question.
My nod was yes. Could I follow up, please? Thank you, Chair. So, can I assume then that this idea did not originate with the community in March? Meaning, is that where presumably this has been an idea that's been around some time before that? That's
that's
not a very
correct.
good question. I apologise.
The need for a dog park within Burundara has been a community desire for a lengthy period of time. At the last meeting, there was a discussion about an alternate site or an earlier site, which was Fritz Holzer, which was not proceeded with, and at that time officers brought back options for councillors to consider, and ultimately the Services Special Committee resolved to establish the dog park at Gordon Barnard Reserve.
Thank you. Councillor Franco, you have another query?
My question was more or less the same as Councillor Bigger's. I'll ask it. Given, it may be a slight variant, but given there's such small amount of public feedback on the proposal, I'm curious what the genesis of the request of the very idea of a fenced off dog park area as opposed to the provision of off-leash areas. It just seems unusual. I don't get any sense in the reports or in the feedback for any strong feeling for that proposal per se and what's driving that.
Mr. Freer? Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The other document it may be worth pointing councillors to is the Burundara Community Plan. So you'll see in the attachment to tonight's report, which has the Services Special Committee agenda from August of this year, talks to the Burundara Community Plan and some key elements of the Burundara Community Plan, pointing to more fenced dog off-lead areas are being important to the community. So I think through that process at that time, the original, concept of it arose into a council document.
Thank you. Councillor Franco.
If fenced off dog off-leash areas are important, why aren't we considering them strategically across the board? Why in a single location if they're of such value?
Mr. Storer, I think, has an answer for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's probably worth mentioning that, in fact, that's the process Council has been through. So we've investigated, I think we began with 15 different locations and had a set of agreed criteria to apply in assessing the suitability of those locations for a dedicated dog park. The result of that analysis was that Fritz Holzer Park presented as the best initial response in meeting those criteria. Council tested that with the community. There was significant opposition, and ultimately Council decided not to proceed with that site. Council then looked for a further analysis to review other sites and did so, I think from memory, looking at a further 3 sites, I think it was, from memory. And the result of that process was that this site came up as being the best response to the criteria which were being applied. And so it was then proceeded with on that basis. So Council started broad, as you've suggested, looked at this strategically, ruled out a number of sites as a consequence of doing that process, and ultimately arrived at the position this is going to be the best location to at least begin our experiences with dedicated dog parks in Burundara.
Thank you, Mr. Storer. Councillor Gold.
Look, I'm probably picking up the same sort of theme, but if there was one suggested location and there was lots of others looked at and this was considered the best, does what we're now looking at serve the population that demand this facility? Or are we going to be looking at, really picking up Victor's question, I get Councillor question, are we then going to be looking at a series of similar requests across the municipality because we establish one, and to meet the demand are we going to then have to establish half a dozen?
Mr. Storer is happy to answer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's entirely in your hands. Ultimately, you've got one in front of you now, and we need to get a direction from you as to what to do. Whether you wish to create others or whether the community initiates others with Council, ultimately it's entirely within your hands to determine whether you'll pursue other alternatives. The thing the Council did do was to, I think, come to the view that perhaps this should be viewed very much as the pilot, and that rather than do the same thing across the whole municipality, it may well be worth upgrading the facilities in a number of other parks to provide more opportunities for those dog owners and their dogs to perhaps get more enjoyment out of the open space they were visiting as a matter of course. So you heard Daniel mention earlier about the funds which are to be deployed in other locations. That's the intent of those funds. So those locations may not in fact result in a dedicated space in the same way as this one. They may simply provide broader opportunities for dog owners.
Can I simply say then, I guess you're saying it could give rise to a series of other requests for similar facilities?
If you're asking me if that could happen, then yes, it certainly could happen. And I'm not sure whether that would be a bad thing if our community was making such a request. We're here to deal with those things, so that's quite possible.
Through you, Madam Chair, just to, if I could ask another question. Since this appears to be setting a precedent, or it may not, and going back to my early question about cost, that might also set a precedent, and since the fencing alone is only a tiny portion of the overall cost, I think I'd personally, and maybe other councillors would also be interested in the makeup of the total cost, and is there any way of bringing this in at a different budget if we're going to be setting a model for these things?
Mr Story, you're happy to answer?
Madam Chair, there are several assumptions in that proposition, and I'm not sure that they can be reasonably addressed in this forum. You've got one proposal in front of you to make a decision. The question as to whether others will come forward in the future and how you might deal with those, I'm unable to respond to. The extent to which, if they do come forward, you wish to develop them in a similar way, again, is very much in your hands. It's not really feasible to anticipate whether they will happen, how many will come forward, and how much you might wish to invest in creating different styles of dedicated dog parks in response. They are entirely matters for you.
Perhaps if we could draw this back to this item being considered.
Look, it is the same matter, and I'm not talking about the range of dog parks. I'm saying in relation to this dog park alone, there's a huge jump.
Could you frame it as a question? We're in question time.
I'm very keen to get, apropos my earlier question, a breakdown on the costs for this particular facility. If only a very small proportion of it is fencing, there must be an awful lot of other things that I personally don't understand, and maybe some other councillors don't, that go to make up a dog park.
Thank you. Perhaps Mr Freer can assist us with some of the inclusions which were put forward in the earlier report.
Thanks, Mr Freer.
Thank you. Through Madam Chair, just to talk through the range of the key features that the fenced dog play area is considered to include is an open grassed area for active play, treed mounds for play again, a circulation path, a dog nature play area which includes balancing logs, boulders, rocks and the like, a shelter as for a meeting place which includes seating around the area as well for diverse users, accessible drinking fountain with bottle refill and a dog bowl, dog bag dispensers, the 1.5 metre high fully enclosed fence with multiple entries, additional path connections and irrigation across the site as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Freer. There appear to be no more questions, so councillors, is anyone prepared to move a motion? Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This dog park is in my ward. I won't labour the point with and expand on a number of the issues that have been raised here tonight, because this is largely an administrative
moving the motion on the screen.
And
Yes.
I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation as printed on the screen. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And seconded, Councillor Park?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Is, for the benefit of the mover and seconder, is anyone opposed to this motion? Councillor Franco? Councillor? Yep, thank you. So if we could go back to the mover to talk to the motion, her motion. Thank you, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I have said, this is largely an administrative motion. The substantive debate on whether we would or would not have a dog park was made in the previous council term, and that decision was taken. So if councillors are of a mind to not support this motion, then indeed we go back to quite a different space and a different conversation. But I would like to put it to my fellow councillors that we have had the conversation with our community. We've had extensive conversation with our community about the dog park. And just to revisit a couple of salient points, 15,000 registered dog owners in Burundara. One consultation revealed on the question that should we have a dedicated dog-friendly play area, 68% said yes. And then in further consultation, that was still at a very high level, 63% supportive. As a candidate in the election we've just had, I can give you anecdotal evidence that this particular innovation and facility that council is going to provide for our community, the majority are very, very supportive of it and looking forward to it arriving and for them to be able to play with their dogs, of which I don't have one. I'm a proud cat owner, but I'm very supportive of people and their companion animals, and was delighted to have had that conversation with that community. I attended all the consultation meetings. So this is an administrative motion moving forward on a decision that was made by council, and I urge my fellow councillors to please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Park is the seconder. Would you like to speak now?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's probably not really appropriate that the motion be moved by a cat person, but nonetheless, I wholeheartedly support it. And I think it's important to note that the motion is actually moved by the ward councillor, the councillor who's representing the ward where this proposed facility is. We shouldn't lose sight of that fact because it's an important one. The strategic work was done, rest assured. We saw reams and reams and reams of pages of reports, and they're all available for you to pause through and consider. They're all available. The fact is, though, that there's been concern expressed that perhaps this will spark further requests. It may well, but the wheels to actually get a dog play area off the ground turn very, very, very slowly here, and we'll be tracking about one every 9 years. So don't worry too much. We're not going to blow the budget. And I jest not. I mean, literally from 2012, 2013, this has been a proposal, and the chair would remember it well because it's dragged on through the entire first two terms that we've been here. It's with great anticipation and excitement that we get here, and rest assured, if I was a dog, my tail would be wagging vigorously, because this has been such a very long journey. As the ward councillor indicated, this is largely a procedural motion, and it should be seen that way. We don't need to start unpicking decision after decision that's been taken. The hard yards have been done, and the decision has been taken that this is the appropriate location. And I think from memory that there were something like 30 sites examined by experts who prepared a report. There was an external consultant. And so this loomed large as one of the suitable sites. And whilst we strayed momentarily into the territory of the Ball and Leisure Centre, my clear understanding of all of that is that it will be demolished, and I've fought tooth and nail every time we've found another use for it, because again, the motion that's on the books from 2013 to demolish it was clear, and it was, largely as Mr Hundley said, on the understanding that the expanded footprint of the sports complex came on the understanding that that would be given back to open space. So I think it behoves councillors to support this motion, which is largely procedural, and to get this done. In terms of the cost, it should be remembered that the council does very little for dog owners, does a great deal to support sports, does a great deal to support cyclists, and mention was made to the Coonung Creek Reserve. Well, off-leash dogs don't mix terribly well with high-speed cyclists, and that was a constant problem, remains a constant problem down there, and it's one of the reasons that I can't take my dogs down there, because it's just not worth the angst and the trouble and the risk both to them and to the cyclists. So this looms large as a very good solution, and I'd imagine we'd wait and see how it goes before we'd embark on future ones, but I think we've got every reason to be excited by the prospect, and it should absolutely have the green light.
Thanks, Councillor Park. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. I concur with the comments already made by Councillor Watson and Councillor Park, and I intend to support this motion before us tonight. It certainly is largely procedural in nature, but I'd just like to highlight 2 points for those that have not seen this through the chamber before. They being that this area at Gordon Barnard Reserve is currently an on-leash area. So what we're introducing here is an additional service or an additional facility for our community. Those within walking distance within that local neighbourhood will have somewhere off-leash to exercise their dogs. And I think that's important, that we're not taking something away. We're in fact giving this community an additional facility and an additional service here. There's nowhere currently in Burundara where you can take a new puppy to teach that puppy how to be safe in the community, to teach that puppy how to sit and to stay and to walk well on a lead and to be recalled with verbal commands. There's nowhere to test that at present. So I think it's really important that we bring in a fenced area where new puppies can be taken and the owners and the dogs can be taught together to exercise that verbal command. And that will make our area and our municipality safer, not just for the dogs, but for the owners and for the rest of the community and those that are perhaps not dog lovers. So on behalf of my Border Collie Maggie, I'm very pleased to be supporting this one tonight, and I would encourage you to also.
Thanks, Councillor Sinfield. Now my screen says Councillor Biggers next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess for me, I don't see this as a dog lovers versus cat lovers or dog haters issue, because I love dogs and I have had one until we lost ours a few months ago. And so I guess I guess for me the question is just whether this is actually what, and I mean I think it's wonderful that there are 15,000 dog owners in Berndarra and that we're thinking about their needs. I guess I'm just not convinced, and I completely appreciate that we've come into this issue late, but I've not been convinced that this is something that the dog owners of Berndarra actually want. So I guess that's my first issue. The second is, would be to some extent about whether the location, and it's interesting, I think that it seems to be something that not many people want in their particular location, which is, I guess, a bit of a red flag for me. I also wonder, given that there are 3 off-lead dog parks within 2 kilometers of this area, I understand, I don't know if it's so much of a need. And clearly there's a concern amongst some people about loss of open space. I guess the final point for me, and maybe it's one that we can address even if we pass this tonight, because I understand the feeling that it's a procedural step, but is that cost figure, which is an estimate right now, but I would like us, if it does go ahead, to think very carefully about that, because we are in a different place than we were 8 months ago in the world, and in the view of our community about what kinds of things we should be spending money on when we have 70% of people in the community on JobKeeper and worried about bigger things potentially than a fenced dog park area. So yeah, that's enough for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bigger. Councillor Franco.
Thank you. I do think this establishes a precedent, and I think it's one that we need to avoid. I do strongly support upgrading facilities for our off-leash areas and providing funding to make our off-leash areas more welcoming. I'm a dog lover. I don't currently have a dog, but I've owned dogs in the past. I don't think it's an issue about being pro or anti-dog. I actually don't think this is the best model with which we should go forward. There are existing off-leash areas in the vicinity, in the municipality and in the neighbourhood, and I welcome opportunities to increase the off-leash areas as long as they're shared areas. I want to address the issue of consultation. We've been told there are 15,000 dog owners. It's true, 15,000 dog owners in Berndarra, and 63% support this proposal. Let's be exact about this. 35 persons out of 53 is the 63%, not 63% of 15,000. 35 people. That's it. Now, of the 15,000 dog owners in Berndarra, is that a representative sample? I don't think so. And I think it's telling that we've had such limited and small amount of feedback in relation to this proposal, both for and against. And I think there's something to be said there. There are dog owners in our municipality out walking their dogs on and off leash all through our parks and open spaces. They're not clamouring for this. And what will this attract? It will probably attract people from other municipalities coming in looking for some specific dog park facilities that are unique, and we're bringing these people in. Maybe these dog park facilities are in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, the outer outskirts, and we need this facility to draw people in here for this purpose, and I don't see what that is. I don't think it's actually talking to our residents. To the extent that fencing is required, we do have sports grounds, and we've been told, I understand, that even in the reserve at question, there is one that we could open up. And my own experience, anecdotal from taking my former dog to a sports ground, I would take my former dog to one particular sports oval when it wasn't being used by sports clubs, and I do recognise that a lot of our open space are handed over to sports grounds and sports facilities. But my anecdotal evidence is that dog owners are often more lax about keeping their dogs under effective control when they're within fenced areas. And it's the obligation of dog owners, when their dogs are off leash, to keep them under effective control at all times. Again, this is anecdotal observation, and there are good, responsible dog owners, even taking their dogs within fenced areas, but the tendency to drop that responsibility is telling. That said, I do support the use of our sports fields for dog exercise areas and off-leash areas after hours, and I think that provides a low-cost, simple solution, shared use of our public spaces that don't alienate for one specific purpose, our open spaces. Look, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Franco. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Interesting to hear all the feedback, and as Councillor Franco said, a lot of questions, and all I can say is that we have asked, and I understand that you haven't been afforded the opportunity to listen to the answers when the discussion's been had before. 15,000 dog owners pre-COVID, when the figures was done with registrations. I'm wondering now what we're up to, because I think just about every second household has adopted a dog since COVID. The real benefit of this that I fully support is that whilst we have off-lead areas, we don't actually have fenced or enclosed areas. And many a time when I had walked my dog in the past, my adult children's dogs, I've been at sports ovals, grounds where dogs are allowed to be off-lead, and almost every time I'll see a dog get onto the road. And as Councillor Sinfield said, particularly when someone's trying to train a young dog and they're not familiar with the recall, and it's not that the dogs are menacing or aggressive, it's just that they need a period of time to learn how to be trained. To be in an enclosed area, low-lying fence, transparent, it's not a deep dark chamber, it's not compromising the quality of the open space, and it's not reducing the open space. It will still be open space. It's just providing an opportunity for dog owners to take dogs off lead for a period of time where they can run, interact, frolic, and enjoy some open space. Other parks or facilities that we've talked about that have been flagged to be more supportive for off-lead areas is exactly what you said, Councillor Franco, with some of the sports fields, and I'll use Linton Park as one, very close to Highfield Road. It has a tubular rail fence, but it's not enclosed, and the amount of dogs I've seen unfortunately get out onto Highfield Road has been a concern. So with this policy in place to support other areas with some fenced enclosures, minimal cost, will help share the safer facilities all around Burundara. It's not exclusive to one area, this is just the first pilot of an enclosed area. So I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. I'll now, I think everyone's lights have gone off, so I'll now hand back to Councillor Watson to wrap up, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And look, I've heard the concerns raised by fellow councillors, and again I go back to the motion that this is largely an administrative motion. The decision was already met. The decision had already been made that we would proceed with this. I could assure fellow councillors, the new councillors, Councillor Franco and Councillor Bigger, that there was integrity in the community consultation. It was wide. The numbers that Councillor Franco was referring to was the second round, where it wasn't an actual survey that was done, it was spontaneous community wanting to make their views known. And the original community consultation had integrity. What there was no integrity about was, unfortunately, we had to remove some of the people who, some of the responses where we had one person respond to the survey 17 times, trying to skew results. But the results themselves, when they were analysed, they were definitive, that the community was largely supportive of this. I've lived in the area for 20 years and have a very intimate knowledge of how Gordon Barnard Reserve operates and what opportunities people have to exercise their pets. Noting the concerns regarding precedent, I don't think precedent is something that applies to the council chamber, where people come forward and say, we have a need in this area, we need to listen to that wherever the matters arise. And if we have areas in Burundara where people come forward and say, look, we really would like to have a dog-off lead area or a dog-friendly play area, we need to listen to that every time it arises. And if it rises in the north or in the south, we apply the same principle. In terms of attracting people from other municipalities, well, let me just assure you that that is not likely, because they already have them. In fact, it may relieve the pressure on their dog play areas, because it'll stop Burundara residents going into Whitehorse and neighbouring municipalities to use facilities that we don't have. So I will leave my comments there and ask for your support to move to the next stage in the delivery of this facility for our residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Now I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? So I'll declare that motion carried. Thank you.
Could you record me as having voted against?
Yes, thank you. And Councillor Bicker, you'd like it recorded? Thank you very much. So I'll declare that motion carried. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Now, let me just turn to the page. So the next item is general business. Councillors, are there any matters of general business? No. Urgent business. Are there any matters of urgent business? No, thank you. So look, thank you to those in the gallery. Oh, confidential business, I'm sorry, I skipped that. Any matters of confidential business? No, can't see any. So look, thank you everyone, those in the gallery, for your attendance. And before I close the meeting, could I just wish you all well and thank you for joining us, and stay healthy and safe. And I declare the Services Delegated Committee meeting closed at a little after 8:30. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening to the council meeting on the 7th of December 2020. Can you please all be upstanding for the reading of the prayer? I call upon Councillor Hollingsworth to read the council prayer.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Almighty God, we humbly seek your blessing upon this council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of your glory and the true welfare of the people of the city of Burundara. Amen.
I acknowledge the traditional owners as the original custodians of this land, including the Wurundjeri people in the northern part of our city. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present and any elders from any other communities who may be here with us today. Given the recent changes to the COVID-19 restrictions, councillors are able to present for the meeting this evening. This meeting is being live streamed on the council website to enable the community to view the proceedings. Should technical problems be encountered during the meeting will be adjourned until the problem is rectified, or if needed, the meeting will be postponed. I'd like to now introduce my fellow councillors and officers. Seated to my left at the horseshoe table, Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Susan Bigger, Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, Councillor Wes Galt, Councillor Di Gillies, Councillor Jane Addis and Councillor Victor Franco. Councillor Nick Stavru is not able to be in attendance in the council chamber this evening. However, he is joining us from his residence. The Local Government Act enables him to join us by electronic means of communication. There are also a number of officers in attendance this evening. Seated to my right is our Chief Executive Officer, Mr Philip Storer. Seated behind Councillor Gillies is Director of Urban Living, Sharon Wickramasinghe. Seated to the right of our CEO is Director of Places and Spaces, Mr Daniel Freer. Seated to my left, Manager of Governance and Legal, Mr David Thompson, and seated to his left, Senior Governance Officer, Elizabeth Manu. There'll also be a number of other staff members in attendance this evening to assist us. Mr Thompson, are there any apologies this evening?
Through you, Mr Mayor, there are no apologies for this evening.
Thank you, Mr Thompson. Item 2, declaration of any conflict of interest of any councillor or council officer. Are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared? There appears to be no conflicts of interest. Thank you. Item 3, presentations of officers' reports. The next item on our business papers is the confidential officer report titled Melbourne University Expression of Interest. Councillors, I'm in search of a colleague moving the following motion. The motion is 1, that in accordance with section 66(1) and 66(2)A of the Local Government Act 2020, the meeting be closed to members of the public for the consideration of the agenda item titled Melbourne University Expression of Interest. 2, the agenda item is confidential information for the purposes of section 3(1) of the Local Government Act 2020. A, because it is council business information, being of information that would prejudice council's positions in commercial negotiations if prematurely released, section 3(1)A and B. The ground applies because the agenda item concerns an expression of interest opportunity with Melbourne University, the premature disclosure of which would diminish the strength of council's positions in any negotiations with Melbourne University. I'm in search of a mover, and I have Councillor Sinfield.
So moved, Chair.
Thank you. And seconded Councillor Gillies. Sorry, it was Councillor Addis. I couldn't see that. Councillor Addis. I do apologise, Councillor Sinfield. It was Councillor Addis first, and seconded Councillor Gillies.
No, sorry. It was moved Councillor Sinfield, seconded Councillor Addis.
Apologies, these names aren't quite here. It was moved Councillor Sinfield, and seconded Councillor Addis. We will get that correct. Thank you, councillors. I will now put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? I declare that motion carried unanimously. I declare that the special meeting of council closed to the public. To the members of the community watching tonight's proceedings, we're going to take you offline. When we've determined this matter, we will bring you back online. Goodbye for the time being. Council. Thank you. Councillors, I'm in Thank you. All those against, I declare that motion carried. Thank you, councillors. To members of the community watching tonight's proceedings, welcome back to the special council meeting. This is the end of council business for this evening. Before I close the meeting, I would like to thank you all who've joined online this evening and wish you and your family all the best of health. Please stay safe. I declare the special meeting of council closed at 10:16. Good night for now. Thank you.